Interesting evening. I don't believe we've formally met, though I've heard whispers about your work in Hell's Kitchen. The Punisher, they call you. Quite the dramatic name. I find it curious how you've chosen to operate so visibly. Every explosion, every body left behind, it all sends messages. Messages can be useful, certainly, but they also alert your enemies and complicate matters for those of us who prefer subtlety.
From where I'm standing, reputation doesn't stop traffickers from moving product through the docks, and mystery doesn't protect kids from predators. Sometimes people need to know that judgment is coming for them.
Judgment. An interesting choice of words. I've found that fear is far more effective than judgment when properly deployed. A criminal doesn't need to see the hand that strikes. He simply needs to know it's out there, waiting. Your explosions, your shootouts, they create panic, certainly, but panic leads to hasty decisions. Hasty decisions are where criminals make mistakes. I've learned to let criminals destroy themselves rather than exhaust myself destroying them.
Let them destroy themselves while innocent people die in the crossfire waiting for your psychological games to work. I've never understood that philosophy. In my experience, action beats waiting. You set traps, I eliminate targets. Both approaches have merit, I suppose, but they operate on completely different timelines. How long have you been doing this exactly? Because in my 5 years, I've personally stopped operations that might have taken you decades to dismantle through manipulation.
I wonder if you've considered the long-term consequences of your rapid approach. Criminal organizations adapt, evolve, learn from each threat. The bodies you leave behind serve as warnings to others. Improve your security. Upgrade your personnel. Increase your ruthlessness. You're not eliminating the problem. You're simply making future adversaries more sophisticated and dangerous.
I can live with. Right now, there are people alive who would be dead if I'd waited for your long game to unfold. So I ask you directly, in your decades of operation, how many lives have you definitively saved? Not theoretically prevented or mathematically modeled, but actually protected through direct intervention. Because I can count mine, and they number in the hundreds. That's not a criticism, just reality.
Yes, that's where our philosophies truly diverge. You measure success in bodies and saved lives through immediate action. I measure it in systemic disruption and organizational collapse. When the Kingpin's empire fractured, not because of your bullets, but because I'd been systematically turning his own people against him for years. Thousands were protected long-term from his influence. That's not theory.
The Kingpin's empire fractured, and then reformed under new management. I was there. I watched it happen while you supposedly had your network of contacts dismantling him psychologically. Within months, a more brutal replacement emerged who didn't have Wilson's old-fashioned codes. Your systemic approach created a power vacuum filled by someone worse.
It doesn't work that way. Crime exists because of systemic failures, poverty, corruption, desperation. Remove one criminal and another fills the void, but corrupt the organization from within, turn lieutenants against their bosses. Expose embezzlement and betrayal among the ranks. That creates permanent fractures that new leadership can't repair because the organization itself has been fundamentally weakened.
Confrontation is necessary. Criminals won't voluntarily step aside. Information you gather through your network takes time to analyze, verify, and act upon. Meanwhile, the subject of that intelligence is still operating, still hurting people, still building power. Yes, sometimes innocents get caught in my operations. That's regrettable. But it's the cost of actually doing something versus talking about systemic solutions that never materialize. Dead innocents are tragic. Dead criminals reduce suffering.
How many innocent bystanders caught in crossfire between your crusade and organized crime? I've spent years establishing relationships with informants, reformed criminals, and sympathetic elements within law enforcement. These networks provide intelligence that prevents confrontations from happening at all. Your approach guarantees confrontation.
Confrontation is necessary. Criminals won't voluntarily step aside. Information you gather through your network takes time to analyze, verify, and act upon. Meanwhile, the subject of that intelligence is still operating, still hurting people, still building power. Yes, sometimes innocents get caught in my operations. That's regrettable. But it's the cost of actually doing something versus talking about systemic solutions that never materialize. Dead innocents are tragic. Dead criminals reduce suffering.
You genuinely believe that killing drug dealers reduces suffering when distribution networks immediately replace them with new dealers. You're not solving the drug problem. You're creating a constantly replenished killing field where you're the only one who benefits. The work, the purpose, the identity, it all depends on enemies existing. What would the Punisher be without criminals to hunt?
What would you be without the mystery and the psychological games? At least I'm honest about what drives me. I saw my family murdered, and I dedicated my life to ensuring other families don't experience that same loss. That's motivation I can defend. Your motivation is far more obscure. Endless manipulation of people and organizations for philosophical purposes I still don't fully understand. Are you even working toward any endpoint, or is this just your hobby?
Hobby. That's an interesting characterization of decades spent trying to reduce suffering. You think your motivation is clearer because it's rooted in trauma, but that's precisely the problem. Trauma has clouded your judgment, made you see enemies everywhere, converted every criminal into a symbol of the person who destroyed your family. You're not fighting crime, you're fighting ghosts.
You don't even know if your work actually prevents anything, or if you're just delusional about your own effectiveness. I can show you the crime statistics in areas where I've operated. Measurable drops in violent crime, human trafficking, organized drug distribution.
Statistics you've conveniently selected to support your narrative. In every neighborhood where you've increased your presence, emergency room visits for gunshot wounds increase, police shootings spike, and gang violence escalates as organizations fight for territory in the power vacuum you create. The overall crime rate may decrease if you're only counting specific categories, but total suffering increases dramatically. Your methodology is flawed, and your data selection is biased.
Biased toward saving lives. Yes, I'm biased in favor of stopping predators. I don't apologize for that bias, and you can parse statistics however you want. But the people living in those neighborhoods know the difference between a criminal running operations and a criminal being dead. They feel safer.
That's the illusion of safety created by a more powerful predator operating in their neighborhood. You've replaced organized crime with vigilante warfare. They still live in danger. The threat source has simply changed. I've worked to actually improve conditions in neighborhoods, connecting community leaders with legitimate business opportunities, identifying corrupt officials, and removing them through legal channels, redirecting potential criminals toward productive lives.
People are dying today while you network and strategize and build psychological pressure. That's not nobility. That's cowardice wrapped in philosophical justification. You hide in shadows not because you're effective, but because you're afraid of direct confrontation. You manipulate from distance because you can't face enemies directly.
Stand in the light and become a target. Your directness makes you predictable, exploitable, vulnerable. I've survived decades in this world by understanding that visibility is weakness. You think standing in the light is courageous. I think it's tactical stupidity that will eventually get you killed. When that moment comes, and it will come, someone faster or more prepared will end your crusade.
You'll survive longer, but to what purpose? To continue your endless manipulation. To watch crimes unfold and work behind the scenes while victims cry for justice that never comes directly. I'd rather burn bright and die, knowing I protected people than fade slowly in the shadows, telling myself I was being strategic while real people suffered real harm.
Your methods are flashy, immediate, satisfying in the way that violence always is, but they're not sustainable, and they don't address root causes. I'll be here long after your crusade has ended, continuing to work quietly, effectively, reshaping this city through means you couldn't comprehend. My work may be invisible, but its effects are permanent and comprehensive.
Means nothing to the widow who needed her husband last week, or the child who needed protection yesterday. You can have your invisible victory in 10 years while I fight for visible survival today. When history judges us both, My hope is that historians count the lives saved through direct action, rather than the philosophical elegance of your never-ending schemes. That's the only judgment that matters.